Well, one of the things about this campaign, and one of the things about me running in downtown Toronto, is that I've been very deeply involved in the music community for 30 years. And there's a lot of politically engaged people in the music community. We generally haven't had the kind of representation that I think we should have, not just as musicians, but as people who are doing precarious employment, and that spans many sectors and many social classes, because precarious employment is the filmmaker and it's the roofer. In Toronto and in this riding of Davenport, there's a huge urban workforce that have these conditions. And so what happens if you're a temp worker and your kid gets sick? So then you got to decide whether, okay, am I making $75 today, or am I looking after my kid? If you're a roofer and you fall off the roof and you're making $10 an hour, do you really have disability pension? I think that there's a lot of people in Toronto that aren't getting the representation they should. And the reason they're not is because many of the politicians we send to Ottawa don't understand what's going on the ground. They don't understand. I think in the blink of an eye, we've gone from a labor force that sort of had jobs for life to one where everyone works for themselves. And I don't think our representation, by and large, has understood that shift. But for someone like me who's been living that life my whole work life, I understand it deeply, and I also understand that it's a growing sector in Toronto. It is part of the economic backbone of this city. Well, like many people, I lived through the Mike Harris Common Sense Revolution, and I saw how that really destroyed a lot of the fabric of our communities, and it really hit Toronto in a major way. And we're still digging out of that time. So we voted the bums out in whenever it was, 2003, and everyone thought, okay, job done. We're back in action. But these guys, they never stopped working. They kept building momentum. They kept organizing, and they have a vision for this country that they think is worth working for 24/7. That vision is diametrically opposed to anything that I recognize as Canadian values. But they work at it, and they work hard. And I think that if we have a vision, and we do, then we have to work harder. So the question really is, do we want to work hard? Do we want to work hard for a vision that is different from the Harper vision? Do we want to work hard for a progressive Toronto, for an engaged community? And so I guess I decided that it was time for me to work harder. I think getting on the bus in Toronto and it costing $3 is too much. I think we're at the point where public transit is becoming unaffordable for people. That is a really dangerous place to be at, and it's at that place largely because the MPs we send to Ottawa, most of them, there's 20 Liberals out of 22, haven't been fighting for this city. The Toronto public transit in Toronto is one of the few major transit systems in the world that doesn't have stable federal funding. And so, why is that? Well, part of the reason that is because the federal government can treat us any old way they want to, because they know they're not going to get any kind of political pushback. So I'm very drawn to that issue. I mean, that issue is about social justice. That issue is about the environment. And you know, this is a backward step. We're trying to get more and more people out of their cars, and yet we're raising the cost of transit. And you know, people have real problems with the service as it is anyway. So that's a big issue. That's a big issue. I think that people tend to think it's just a municipal issue. And that plays very well into the federal government's hands because, you know, we have a progressive city council here in Toronto. I think they've done a really good job on transit. But, you know, the federal government hangs them out to dry, and they're quite happy to let, you know, our city council reps take the heat for things that they're not doing. I think that for many of the downtown ridings that have been held by the Liberal Party for decades and for generations, there is a sense here that they of entitlement to those seats. There's a sense that that our vote is taken for granted and that their seats are taken for granted, and and when you feel like that over time, you start to get lazy, and you stop really remembering why you were elected in the first place. I mean, these guys, they don't seem to work very hard. They know how to do one thing, and that is they know how to win elections. But between elections, you don't see these guys. You don't know what they do. They're certainly not out there advocating on our behalf. If they were, I don't think a bus ride would cost $3 today. If they were, I don't think we'd be battling a ridiculous plan to run 400 dirty diesel trains up the west end of the city. If they were engaged and working hard on our behalf, I don't think we'd have so many seniors, for example, in this community, in this riding, living in poverty. I think we'd have much more serious action being taken on the environment. And again, I go back to the urban workforce. I mean, this is the backbone of the Toronto economy. Toronto is the engine of the Canadian economy, and we're largely overlooked. And so I think that I can bring a lot of energy and engagement. I think that this riding deserves that and needs it. I mean, one of the things that that I've thought about a lot is just as a citizen and as a journalist, I've been on the other side of the politician's speech. You know, I've watched politicians and I've been in rooms with politicians as they're speaking, and by and large, it's an underwhelming experience. You know, people want to connect. They want to they want to have engaged representatives. They want to have committed leaders, and who understand that leadership is about listening, and it's about sitting down and talking to people. It's about moving together as a community to a place, to an idea, to an issue, to a policy, and I think if there's any level of interest in what I'm doing, it's not even so much about me. It's about the idea that, you know, we can do some of this political discourse differently, that we can maybe change the political culture in some ways. And at the very least, what we can do is get some more committed and dynamic leadership and representation in Toronto and in the House of Commons.